Hi Year 11s, so this is going to be the last video on the circulatory system. This one's going to be focusing on the control of blood and blood pressure. So starting with it, we need to talk about the blood as a pump, and we can see that we've got a semi-realistic version of the heart here and what's happening on the inside every time the heart pumps. So your heart beats around 70 times a minute, which is around 100,000 times a day. That's made possible by all the muscle tissues in the wall, which we can see all along here, cardiac muscle all throughout the walls, mainly in the ventricles. So we can see mainly in the ventricles down here. Most of that thick muscles, we've got the atriums up here, obviously. The special thing about cardiac muscle is it's the only type of muscle in our bodies that can contract continuously and not get tired. So there's no lactic acid being built up inside your heart muscle. When the heart relaxes, that's when blood's flowing in from the veins. And when it contracts, that's when blood's being forced into the arteries. The heart will contain valves, as you can see, opening and closing over here, which prevents the blood going back from the atriums into the ventricles. Every time the heart's beating, it's setting up a wave of pressure that's traveling along the arteries. That's called a pulse. In order to keep contracting and relaxing the way it's doing, in this, like in the diagram here, it needs a good supply of oxygen. It's obviously going to get that through the coronary arteries, again, which you can see all around the heart. A bit more over here, you can see them. Constantly supplying oxygen to the heart, ensuring that there's no anaerobic respiration taking place. A heart attack is basically when one of those arteries becomes blocked and oxygen supply is limited to the heart. So, how is the heart controlled? It's worth noting if you take the heart away from the body, it will beat by itself. Because the fact the heart is beating by itself without the body, that means the mechanism that's making the heart beat has to be in the heart itself. Basically, the heart is made to beat by a tiny electrical pulse sent from the tissue in the walls of the right atrium. That the maker of that pulse is called the pacemaker, and that makes sense because it's setting the pace for the heart. Sometimes the pacemaker fails to work properly, or a block develops between the pacemaker and the heart muscle. If that happens, a person can be given an artificial pacemaker, which will do the job for them. All an artificial pacemaker is an electrical device placed under the skin of the wall of the chest, and it sends electrical stimuli through an electrode into the heart. So blood pressure. What is blood pressure? Blood pressure is basically talking about the pressure in the arteries caused by the pumping of the heart and narrower blood vessels. So blood pressure is usually high because it keeps blood moving, but it can depend based on the activity you're doing at the time. So anything that makes your heart beat faster or makes your arteries more narrow is going to increase the blood pressure in your body. If you're constantly under high pressure, it puts extra strain on the heart. That strain can sometimes cause blood vessels to burst. If that happens in your brain, the cells in that region of the burst are generally killed. That's when you get a stroke. We'll talk about that a bit more in later topics. Blood pressure can also affect the kidneys. So blood pressure has to be high enough for the kidneys to filter blood, but it can't be too high that it ruptures the capillaries that are in that glomerulus that we talked about last week. Otherwise, you're obviously going to end up with blood in your urine and not being filtered correctly. Just a little fun diagram on the side. A bit of an exaggeration of how blood pressure is taken. Generally, you've got something around your arm and it expands. So what causes high blood pressure? The annoying part about that is doctors don't actually have a definite answer to this. They do know that there is a correlation with stress, tension, overeating, smoking, and drinking too much alcohol. But they can't find an exact link. It's also important to note, yes, high blood pressure is a problem, but so is low blood pressure. Having salt keeps blood pressure at the right level in the right amounts. That's because it causes kidneys to retain water, and consequently the volume of blood is kept constant or increased, and which will help to raise blood pressure. So salt basically helps to keep your blood pressure from going too low. Having too much obviously is going to impact and keep your blood pressure quite high.